We often imagine that modernity, the rise of science, reason, and individual freedom were born in the Enlightenment. But what if this modern project didn't begin in the 17th century? What if it began with Plato's early iterations of the allegory of the cave? In the previous episode, we discussed the allegory of the cave and its epistemological foundations. In this episode, we will explore how Plato, along with Aristotle, laid the foundations for epistemology long before Descartes, Kant, and other such modern thinkers could ever have the desire for bringing certainty into their knowledge. Now, before I move on any further, I think it's important that I clarify the term epistemology. The word epistemology comes from the two Greek words, which has to do with knowledge, and logos, which has to do with rational thought. Together, these two words form the idea of having a certain science for knowledge. Now we return to Plato's allegory of the cave so that we can get some real clear and distinct knowledge as to what it means to have certain knowledge. For Plato is more than the mere accumulation of facts and observation. It is about the journey of the soul. This journey is from darkness into the light. In Plato's Republic, we see that Socrates beckons us and he says, imagine human beings living in an underground cave. They are like us. They see only shadows on the wall. And if they are freed and turn toward the light, they will be dazzled and confused, but eventually they will come to see. Now, there are two essential features of this quote from Socrates. Firstly, that when one is freed, or that when one is turned towards the light, they necessarily experience some discomfort. When we think about our own modern context and the process of becoming enlightened, we often think of it in terms of a journey that will be enjoyable, pleasant, and really invigorating. But the image of education or enlightenment that Plato, Socrates, is really giving here is one of discomfort, one of adjustment. The second feature of this quote, though, demonstrates that once the individual has undergone the process of enlightenment, they will then be restored to, except for this time, they will actually see real things as opposed to the shadows. Now, Plato's famous allegory, the cave, captures its core idea that most people prefer illusions, or most people live in illusions, taking appearances to be reality. Now, this also leads us to a greater understanding of how Plato actually conceived of the hierarchy of knowledge. And this, we have to return a few pages to his articulation of what they call the. So within Plato's thought, there are two realms. There's the visible realm and there's the intelligible. The visible realm deals with images and belief. The second realm, the intelligible, it deals with understanding and reason. And above all, the form of the good is that which gives truth to the objects of knowledge. To put this simply, every form of knowledge that we could possibly have has its source in this thing called the good. Now, true knowledge, epistemology, doesn't come from the senses, but from the soul, and it's turned towards the eternal and the unchanging. For Plato, philosophy is a process of recollection. The Greek word for this is anamnesis. And this is a remembering of the truths that the soul already knows. And another dialogue titled The Meno, where Socrates is engaged in a discussion with a young person about the nature of knowledge. Socrates states, the soul is immortal and has all things and has seen all things. There is no teaching, only recollection. Now, when we move into a figure such as Aristotle, we're going to see a radical distinction and difference and disagreement. Aristotle disagreed with Plato on the assertion of where knowledge comes from. While Plato turned toward the forms or the intelligible to receive knowledge, Aristotle turns towards empirical or experiential objects. In Aristotle's posterior analytics, he states, from perception arises memory, from memory, experience, and from experience comes the universal, which is the starting point of scientific knowledge. Already you see here a clear distinction. There's a concern with method. Also, there's this introduction of the term science, which is to say that there's an attempt to have certainty with regards to empirical experiences. For Aristotle, knowledge still aims at universals, but it begins in the particular. That is just to say that Aristotle wants to begin with objects as opposed to forms of objects and thought. Through observation, induction, and reasoning, Aristotle believes we discover the real causes of things. In Aristotle's metaphysics, he states, all humans by nature desire to know. An indication of this is the delight we take in the senses. Yet, the senses do not give us knowledge of why something is. So Plato and Aristotle agree. True knowledge is more than perception, but they differ on how they get there. Plato begins with the mind or the forms and the intelligible, whereas Aristotle is going to turn towards the world and the empirical. Now, centuries later, this discussion will be reinvigorated and the tensions will reappear as well, but in a new form. And this happens with the French figure René Descartes. And what Descartes is most known for is being the father of modern philosophy. And he takes up the same distrust of the senses that Plato had. In Descartes' Meditations of First Philosophy, he states, whatever I have accepted up until now as most true, I have acquired from the senses. But from time to time, I have found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us, even once. And so Descartes resolves to doubt everything until he reaches something foundational, fundamental. And this method that Descartes is utilizing in these first meditations is known as hyperbolic doubt. And this type of doubt is centered around an exaggeration, just like a hyperbole. And through the process of doing this, you'll find in Descartes' meditations that the one thing that one is unable to doubt is that there is a subject who is doubting. That is, you have to exist in order to be able to doubt. Like Plato, Descartes' turn is inward, but unlike Plato, he does so through radical doubt in search of certainty. And like Aristotle, he seeks clear methods for building knowledge. He wants to be scientific. Now, when we ask the question of what knowledge is, we're never just asking a technical question. We're asking something deeply and profoundly about our nature as human beings. Plato said that to know is to turn toward the good. Aristotle said that to know is to begin with wonder. And Descartes says that knowledge begins in doubt. Across these three figures, we are getting three different epistemological accounts. When it comes to our own time, the question becomes, how are we to become enlightened? What are the features that make up our knowledge? Should knowledge come from the forms of thought? Should they come from our experiences? Or should they come from a certain type of skepticism? If you found this video helpful, like, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to hear your answers. What do you think? Do you think that knowledge is something that should actually be articulated in a scientific format? Or is it something that we can grasp only through philosophical discourse?